Hello, everybody, and Merry Christmas. Welcome to this Sunday's online service. It is the day after Christmas. I hope that you have had and continue to have a warm and safe and peaceful holiday. We're continuing with the Christmas theme today since it's only the 26th, still December, and we're taking a slightly different approach to this sort of simplified, narrowed down service today. And we're going to be thinking about storytelling, and particularly situating the story of Christmas into God's larger story. It's a story that we read about from the Bible and beginning to end. And then we also will consider our place within that story, you and me as individuals, but in particular as a community of believers, as the church, and how we connect to that story. It's a very simplified version because these are huge topics and we have just some minutes together today, but it's a slightly more kid-friendly service than usual because we are going to be reading sections of this Jesus Storybook Bible by Sally Lloyd Jones. And I recommended this in an email not too long ago. This is a really wonderful children's Bible, and actually I think it's great for adults too, because it goes through just an overview of some of the highlights and the stories in our regular adult Bibles. And it really helps to summarize and explain in ways that are easy to understand what's going on in the story. And it really centralizes Jesus within every story, even throughout the Old Testament, looking at how different situations in the Old Testament point to the coming of Jesus. And so I can't recommend this enough. It's really great. It was actually recommended to me by Fiona Miles, who was one of our guest speakers in our Summer of Slow this past summer. So that's where we're going this morning. Thanks for being here, whether you're watching the premiere. If you are watching the premiere, of course, please say hi and let us know you're watching. We'd love to connect with you there, but also glad to have you along if you're watching another time, another day throughout the week. So now we're going to welcome to the camera our call to worship scripture readers today, Gabriella and Evangeline.
John chapter 1, verses 1 through 5 and 14. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth.
Thank you so much, Gabriella and Evangeline, for reading that passage from John's Gospel. And I'm going to lead us in a prayer that I'm going to read from Centering Prayers. It's a book that I've mentioned before, again by Peter Traben Haas. And this is a Christmas prayer for us. Christmas is for everyone. God of Bethlehem, Christmas is for the depleted, defeated, and destroyed. It is for the burdened, barren, and beaten down. Christmas is for the poor, outcast, and prisoner. Christmas is for the hungry, oppressed, and refugee. Christmas is for the empty, poured out and broke. Christmas is for the evicted and the laid off. It is for the bankrupted, jobless, and homeless. Christmas is for the ill, bedridden, and locked up. Christmas is for the abandoned, hopeless, and depressed. Christmas is for the sick, weak, and dying. Christmas is for the elderly, the alone, and the weary. Christmas is for the orphans and the unborn. Christmas is for travelers, the stranded and the waiting. Christmas is for the convicted, the caught, and the anxious. Christmas is for the guilty, the frauds, and the unjust. It is for the divorced and the miserable. It is for the occupied, the invaded, and the terrorized. Christmas is for the third world and the forgotten. It is for the thirsty, hungry, tattered, and unclothed. And also, Christmas is for the uplifted, victorious, and enduring. It is for the light-hearted, fruitful, and lifted up. Christmas is for the wealthy, the famous, and the free. Christmas is for the fed, the powerful, and the oppressor. Christmas is for the full, the overflowing, and the put together. Christmas is for the homeowner and the employed. It is for the billionaire and the boss. It is for the healthy, vibrant, and free. Christmas is for the friended, the hopeful, and the joyful. Christmas is for the healthy, the strong, and the living. Christmas is for youth, for families, and for the energized. Christmas is for the adopted and the born. Christmas is for the homebound, the befriended, and those who have arrived. Christmas is for the innocent, the free, and the peaceful. Christmas is for those with clear consciences, the authentic and the just. It is for the married and the joyful. It is for the occupiers, the invaders, and the terrorizers. Christmas is for the first world. It is for all who are remembered. It is for the quenched, satisfied, stable, and clothed. Christmas is for everyone, every human being, every living thing, every place, every person, every time. Christmas is here, there, and everywhere, everything past, present, and future. Christ is come for all. Christ is your yes to us. You are, thus we shall be. Christmas is for love, and we welcome your divine love and blessings to, for, and in all these ways of being human. Amen. And now Josh and Heather's three wonderful kids, Easton, Ainsley, and Claire, have put together a special Christmas song for us this morning.
Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is right. Round yon virgin mother and child, holy and so tender and
Let's talk about stories. Stories are the way we interpret our lives and the world around us. The stories that have been told to us and the stories that we tell ourselves, they shape what we believe and how we behave, the way that we move through the world. And when I say story, I don't mean fiction. A story can be a faithful historic account or a construct that somebody invented. And either way, we can learn from both types of stories. For example, Jesus often taught about what his kingdom is like by using stories called parables. They were not true in the sense that Jesus didn't actually happen to know some guy and he's recounting what he heard about this person. And yet they point to a very deep, true reality. The novelist Leslie Jameson says this: "I believe in the way storytelling can invite us to imagine lives beyond our own and to question the narratives that have become most familiar to us." And isn't that what Jesus did all the time? When the Jews were caught up in their hatred toward the Samaritans, Jesus breaks down the walls of hostility by telling the story of a good Samaritan who understood love. And when the Jewish religious leaders were so focused on the letter of the law of Moses, Jesus told a story about two lost sons and their father, whose arms were open wide to both of his lost sons. And he said that this is God's posture towards all people. And Jesus flipped the script by using stories to expand our imagination beyond the narratives that we just take for granted. Another way of saying it is that stories confront our biases. Biases are like corrective lenses, like these glasses that I'm wearing, that we wear and through which we see the world. Although most of the time, we're not even aware that we're wearing them. God has been faithfully confronting humans' assumptions, biases, cultural narratives, the familiar narratives that define our worldviews. And since sin entered the world, God has been taking our broken, scratched up lenses and giving us new and clearer ones through which to see the world, to see more accurately, coming closer and closer to the way God sees things, to reality as it really is. The clearest picture of the reality of God, of his design for humanity and all of creation, is seen in the person of Jesus. The birth, life, death, and resurrection of Jesus is the most accurate and clear lens through which we see and can understand the world. Jesus is the anchor of our story, the part of the narrative that makes sense of all of the other stories. This past fall here in these online services, we did a mini series called Famous Bible Stories, where we spent some time looking at some of those better known or famous events that are recorded in the Bible. We talked about David and Goliath, Queen Esther, Daniel and the lion's den, and also the conversion of Paul. We saw how God flipped the script of power and empire and instead did miraculous things in unexpected ways, often through the ordinary, the oppressed, or the overlooked. And we learned some ways that you and I can read these stories from where we sit today in Canada, some thousands of years after they happened. And we also just touched on the way each of these smaller stories fits into a bigger story, a meta-narrative, if you're looking for a literary term. A meta-narrative is an overarching account or interpretation of events and circumstances that provides a pattern or a structure for people's beliefs and gives meaning to their experiences. So God tells a bigger story. God tells this bigger story, this meta-narrative in a lot of different ways. The psalmist writes in Psalm 19, "The heavens are singing about how great God is, and the skies are shouting it out. See what God has made, day after day, night after night." They're speaking to us. God chose a people to carry his story. And he then invited the Gentiles, the non-Jewish people, into that story as well, to be the people who would carry it forward. And Christians, we're called to do a lot of things, but I think one of our primary tasks is to be storytellers, to be witnesses of Jesus. "You will be my witnesses," Jesus told his disciples. The church will be witness to the truth of Jesus. And of course, one of the most magnificent ways this story is told is also through the Bible, these written words. All of the books and the letters and the prophecies and the poetry, they all line up beautifully to tell the story of God pursuing the world to restore shalom. Shalom, which is the Hebrew understanding of peace. That means restoration and wholeness. And last Sunday, we talked more about how Jesus brings this shalom. There's a really beautiful introduction to the Bible in this book here. It's the Jesus Storybook Bible, written by Sally Lloyd Jones. And since this is a storytelling Sunday, I'd like to read that introduction to you. So here is how it starts. God wrote, "I love you." He wrote it in the sky and on the earth and under the sea. He wrote his message everywhere because God created everything in his world to reflect him like a mirror, to show us what he's like, to help us know him, to make our hearts sing. The way a kitten chases her tail, the way red poppies grow wild, the way a dolphin swims. And God put it into words too, and wrote it in a book called the Bible. Now, some people think the Bible is a book of rules, telling you what you should and shouldn't do. The Bible certainly does have some rules in it. They show you how life works best. But the Bible isn't mainly about you and what you should be doing. It's about God and what he has done. Other people think the Bible is a book of heroes, showing you people you should copy. The Bible does have some heroes in it, but as you'll soon find out, most of the people in the Bible, they're not heroes at all. They make some big mistakes, sometimes on purpose. They get afraid and run away, and at times, they're downright mean. No, the Bible isn't a book of rules or a book of heroes. The Bible is most of all a story. It's an adventure story about a young hero who comes from a far country to win back his lost treasure. It's a love story about a brave prince who leaves his palace, his throne, everything, to rescue the one he loves. It's like the most wonderful of fairy tales that has come true in real life. You see, the best thing about this story is it's true. There are lots of stories in the Bible, but all the stories are telling one big story. The story of how God loves his children and comes to rescue them. It takes the whole Bible to tell this story. And at the center of the story, there is a baby. Every story in the Bible whispers his name. He is like the missing piece in a puzzle, the piece that makes all the other pieces fit together. And suddenly, you can see a beautiful picture. And this is no ordinary baby. This is the child upon whom everything would depend. This is the child who would one day, but wait, our story starts where all good stories start, right at the very beginning. If you want to read the story of God's interaction with his creation in the Bible, at least in one of these adult versions of the Bible, good for kids too, but a little bit harder to understand the whole story. But if you want to start, and you should, this is an amazing book to read every day, and it will never get old. Where should you begin? Usually when you read a story, you start at the beginning. But the place that I would recommend you start reading this Bible is at the beginning of our New Testament with the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, that tell us all about Jesus, about this child who's born into the world. After all, Jesus himself said in Revelation chapter 22, "I am the beginning and the end." You might also begin, kind of at the same time, by reading the first 3 chapters of Genesis. That's the first chapters at the very beginning, front of our Bible. And it's here that we learn of God's original plan for creation in those 3 chapters of Genesis. It's here where we get the story of how sin entered the world, how disharmony broke God's shalom. So let's read what happens, how that happens in the Jesus Story Book Bible. This section is called The Terrible Lie, and I'll just read parts of it. Now God had given Adam and Eve only one rule. "Don't eat the fruit on that tree," God told them, "because if you do, you'll think you know everything. You'll stop trusting me, and then death and sadness and tears will come." You see, God knew if they ate the fruit, they would think they didn't need him, and they would try to make themselves happy without him. But God knew there was no such thing as happiness without him, and life without him wouldn't be life at all. As soon as the snake saw his chance, he slithered silently up to Eve. "Does God really love you?" the serpent whispered. "If he does, why doesn't he let you eat the nice, juicy, delicious fruit? Poor you. Perhaps God doesn't want you to be happy." The snake's words hissed into her ears and sunk down deep into her heart like poison. "Does God love me?" Eve wondered. Suddenly she wasn't so sure. "Just trust me," the serpent whispered. "You don't need God. One small taste, that's all, and you'll be happier than you could ever dream." Eve picked the fruit and ate some, and Adam ate some too, and a terrible lie came into the world. It would never leave. It would live on in every human heart, whispering to every one of God's children, "God doesn't love me." Usually Adam and Eve loved to hear God's voice and would run to him. But this time, when he came to the garden, they ran away from him and hid in the shadows. "Where are you?" God called. "Hiding," Adam said. "We're afraid of you." "Did you eat the fruit I told you not to eat?" God asked them. Adam said, "Eve made me do it." "What have you done?" God asked. And Eve said, "The serpent made me do it." And terrible pain came into God's heart. His children hadn't just broken the one rule, they had broken God's heart. They had broken their wonderful relationship with him. And now he knew everything else would break. God's creation would start to unravel and come undone and go wrong. From now on, everything would die, even though it was all supposed to last forever. God loved his children too much to let the story end there. Even though he knew he would suffer, God had a plan, a magnificent dream. One day he would get his children back. One day he would make the world their perfect home again. And one day he would wipe away every tear from their eyes. You see, no matter what, in spite of everything, God would love his children with a never stopping, never giving up, unbreaking, always and forever love. And though they would forget him and run from him, deep in their hearts, God's children would miss him always and long for him. Lost children yearning for their home. Before they left the garden, God whispered a promise to Adam and Eve. It will not always be so. I will come to rescue you. And when I do, I'm going to do battle against the snake. I'll get rid of the sin and the dark and the sadness you let in here. I'm coming back for you." And he would. One day, God himself would come. So from here on, the Old Testament, from Genesis to Malachi, describes God's covenant relationship with Abraham and Abraham's descendants, the Israelites, who were the people God chose to remember the story of God's love, and through whom God would bless all the nations and make all the wrong things right. And God told the Israelites, the Jewish people, that he would one day send a Messiah to save them. Messiah in Greek means Christ. The Christ, the Savior, would come. And after centuries, in fact, most of our Bible, the first 3/4, describes how God interacted with that chosen people, Abraham's descendants. And after centuries, finally, the Messiah was going to arrive. But again, not the way the Jewish people expected he would. Once again, God was going to flip the script. The king that God had promised David centuries before arrived. This child was a new kind of king. Though he was the Prince of Heaven, he had become poor. Though he was the mighty God, he had become a helpless baby. This king hadn't come to be the boss. He had come to be a servant. And this is what we celebrate at Christmas. In John's Gospel, he writes about the coming of the Messiah in this way. And this is the passage that Gabriella and Evangeline read for us at the beginning of the service. This is what John wrote. "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him, all things were made. Without him, nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth." The Word who created life at the beginning of the world was made flesh. He joined his creation by entering into it. And this is what we call the incarnation of Jesus, where Creator God got a body just like ours. And what does it say about the value of our bodies and our world that God, who first of all created all of it, and then entered into it himself, and finally that he promises to redeem it, not just the spiritual parts, but our physical bodies and this created earth. I think it says a lot about how important it is, this physical world. It matters to God what we do while we live here. Well, back to the story. Jesus grew up, as all humans do. And just as Adam and Eve were tempted by the snake in the garden, Jesus was tempted too in the desert. But Jesus said, "No, I will obey God and only do what he says." It was just as God had promised to Adam and Eve all those years before. Jesus had come to do battle against the snake's work. He would get rid of the sin and the darkness and the tears, and he would suffer, but he would win. In his ministry, Jesus healed, he taught, he made the sad things come untrue. He was mending God's broken world. He was establishing God's kingdom. And God's kingdom is everywhere that God is king. The Jewish religious leaders and the Roman Empire really didn't like the idea of a new king. It would mean that they would lose the power over the people. So they had Jesus killed. They didn't know that Jesus had the power to reverse the curse of humanity's sin, and that even death couldn't defeat him, because he rose from the grave and he made a way for peace to be restored. And then he returned to the Father in heaven, and he told his followers, his church, to keep telling the story. The whole story is about him. This is what we mean at Bluewater sometimes when we say that we're a Jesus-centered church. Jesus is the lens through which we interpret our Bibles and we interact with the world around us. Jesus walked with his disciples after he rose from the tomb. And he said, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, Jesus explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. We read in Luke's Gospel, chapter 24. Jesus is the lens through which the whole story is meant to be read. So, the meta-narrative, the big story in Sally Lloyd Jones's Jesus Storybook Bible, her meta-narrative explanation is this: it's God's mission to rescue his children. And there are other ways of interpreting the meta-narrative of the scriptures. The theologian Bernard Ott wrote a book called God's Shalom Project, which is translated from German by Tim Geddert, who was one of my professors this past semester. And in God's Shalom Project, Bernard Ott defines shalom as the state of being right with God, with people, and with all of creation. The meta-narrative that he uses to describe the Bible is that it tells the story of God pursuing humanity in order to restore shalom. Ott traces the shalom project of God from creation, the fall, through the prophets and the kings of Israel, and to the arrival of Jesus. And the project is ongoing. We are invited to participate today as we anticipate the second coming of Christ, when we will witness the fullness of shalom on earth. And all through the book, there's this emphasis being placed on not just being individuals who believe in Jesus, but on being a people of shalom together. The two great questions for human accountability are, where are you? And where is your brother? These are the questions that God asked Adam and Cain in Genesis. When we're confronted with the consequences of our choice to reject God, we tend to hide from him and to push away and even put the blame on someone else, just like Adam did to Eve, and then Eve did and said, the serpent made me do it. Our tendency is to retreat from him and to put the blame elsewhere. But God always invites us to reconnect. Instead of constantly scolding us and reprimanding us for what we did wrong, God shows us what a new version for humanity can be like. And he's constantly looking for opportunities to restore shalom with us. And I hope that this is what Bluewater seeks to do, that we focus on reconnection over reprimand, or even over simply leaving people alone to make their own moral judgments. What if reconnection, reconciliation, and shalom were the goals of our church? Ott also wrote this quote that is really, I think, inspirational for us as a church. We're invited as believers and as the church to experience and to live out the reality of God's project now already. We do it with calmness, neither fighting desperately for its success, nor holding out any illusions that we can get the job done, for we know that Jesus is coming again. So we live as signs of the coming kingdom. We're not called to fight tooth and nail for a better world, but neither are we called to live indifferently. When we follow the way of Jesus, we do it with this sense of calmness. And the Christ followers who've made the greatest impact on my life have been those people who carry that sense of calm deep within, even while they pursue shalom with genuine passion. During the polarizing chaos of politics and pandemic and other things that tend to divide us, a sense of calmness would be an incredibly helpful and attractive quality in the church. So I think it's important for us to know where we are in God's story today, to find our current position within the big story, the meta-narratives of the Bible. And I think, first of all, it's grounding. It connects us to God's actions throughout history. Second, it positions us to read the smaller narratives of the Bible, all the specific books and letters and stories, with greater accuracy because we're looking through the lens of Jesus. And then finally, it gives our lives purpose and meaning for today, for right now. And in the new year, I'm excited to introduce you to my friend Cecil, who I met through school. He and his family are missionaries in Thailand, and he's going to share with us part of his story and what he's learning about living for something larger than himself, living as a sign of the coming kingdom in Thailand, and encouraging us to do the same in Kincardine. But for now, because it's the day after Christmas, let's refocus our attention on the miraculous event of Jesus' birth, the Word made flesh. Let's read one of the final pages to the Jesus storybook, which is the retelling of John's Revelation, the last book of the Bible, which is a vision of heaven. And then we'll finish today with a short reflection video created by the Skit Guys. So here's where we are. It was hard to squeeze all John saw into words and fit it onto a page and cram it into a book. All the words on all the pages of all the books in all the world would never be enough. I am the beginning, Jesus said, and the ending. One day, John knew, heaven would come down and mend God's broken world and make it our true, perfect home once again. And he knew in some mysterious way that would be hard to explain that everything was going to be more wonderful for once having been so sad. And he knew then that the ending of the story was going to be so great, it would make all the sadness and tears and everything seem like just a shadow that is chased away by the morning sun. I'm on my way, said Jesus. I'll be there soon. John came to the end of his book, but he didn't write the end, because of course, that's how stories finish, and this one's not over yet. So instead he wrote, "Come quickly, Jesus," which perhaps is really just another way of saying, to be continued.
Come, thou long expected Jesus, born to set thy people free from our fears and sins. Release us